The winner of Best Ball Mania will have watched this video, and it might as well be you. The best way to win millions of dollars drafting fantasy football teams is to stay one step ahead of your opponents. Your opponents don't know that there are specific things you need to do when drafting on the opening night of Best Ball Mania, and then different strategic levers you need to pull when drafting before the contest closes in September. In this video, I'm going to provide you with a step-by-step guide on the exact edges that you should be pushing in drafts based specifically on when you are drafting. These tactics will allow you to consistently draft better teams than the people who aren't paying attention to the intricacies of the drafting calendar. Underdog Fantasy's Best Ball Mania is the biggest season-long tournament out there, and it's an especially unique tournament because it's open for 4 months and it spans the entire duration of the summer. Luckily for you, I've compiled all of these specific edges you need to push at specific times and I created what's essentially a cheat sheet for you to reference throughout the summer, regardless of when you are drafting. Feel free to check the timestamps down below and hop to whichever specific draft month we are currently in. Real quick before we dive in, you might be wondering why it matters at all when you draft. And it's a great question that has led to lots of debates over the years. Early on, people recommended barbelling your drafts, drafting either early or late, but never in between. The logic was sound, but then the 2 best teams in BBM3, the first place roster and the roster that won the regular season top prize, were drafted smack dab in the middle of the summer on July 18th. The Barbell Bros were down bad. The moral of the story is that we don't need to overthink when we draft. The perfect draft can occur at any time. That doesn't mean there aren't pros and cons to drafting early and late, though. The key is to adjust your strategies based on when you are drafting, which is what I'm going to show you how to do today. If we tweak our strategies based on the unique events that unfold in the NFL calendar, we can draft tournament-winning teams at any point throughout the summer. Welcome to April, where 2 seismic events kick off hot best ball summer, the NFL draft and the launch of Best Ball Mania. And to capitalize, we need to move quickly. The number one thing we need to do when the contest opens is aggressively target the rookies and the players who are guaranteed to rise over the coming weeks. The opening days of the contest are when the ADP market will be most inefficient. A lot of these rookie ADPs are pulled directly from the pre-draft NFL contests, which obviously don't account for hugely important new information like draft capital and team landing spot. This is the best chance to use your ball-knowing skills and interpret what happened in the draft quicker than the market. Last year, the Lions selected rookie tight end Sam Laporta in the 2nd round, but he didn't even have an ADP when the contest opened. In my first BBM draft of the year, Pat Kerrane and I took him with our 17th round pick at the very end of the draft.
Can we go Laporta? Is my guy Laporta still there?
Yeah.
Let's go Laporta.
We are living a little tonight. Over the coming weeks, his price would rise 4+ rounds. Reacting quickly to new prices isn't always about buying. Sometimes this means avoiding rookies who have an inflated ADP. Last year, Izzy Abanikanda was a popular pick in pre-draft contests, but his fall in the NFL draft to the 5th round made his starting ADP way too high. It's important to avoid these landmines and make sure you aren't anchored to bad ADPs. There's really 2 reasons why moving quickly on mispriced players provides a huge edge. The first reason getting ADP values is so important is because it gives you a chance to build super teams with values that won't exist the rest of the contest. Think of it like pulling the ladder up behind you. Not only are you getting a great player at a discount, but you're also building a unique team that no one else will have access to. The data bears this out. The top 10% of teams in BBM3 were able to gain an ADP equivalent of 116 picks. As the season progresses, more drafts and more information will eliminate any major inefficiencies, so the time to capitalize is in the first few days after the contest opens. Move quickly. The other thing we can finally do when the contest opens is start stacking up these rookies. It was guesswork in the pre-draft contest, but we now can reliably start stacking them with their new teammates. This is an important element to immediately consider because we know that stacking helps advance rates. In Mike Leone's terrific Best Ball Manifesto, his data showed that stacking your QBs and having 3 to 5 players stacked yielded above average advance rates in BBM3. You can go look at any of the top BBM teams over the years. They all predominantly feature stacks. And by the way, don't sweat it if you get sniped on your QB. Stacking the skill position players has value too. The BBM4 champ got sniped on quarterbacks twice in a row trying to stack his tight ends, but Fareed's commitment to stacking led him to the tournament-winning Jordan Love and Jaden Reed stack in the final rounds. Welcome to May. Right when the ADP dust starts to settle after the draft, the NFL drops the full schedule for the year, which means it's time to start optimizing for the playoff weeks, and more specifically, the most important week of all. We don't need to belabor why week 17 is all that matters. We already made an entire video dedicated to treating week 17 as the most important week of the tournament, and I highly recommend rewatching that before the schedule drops if you need a refresher on why it's so critical to success. Mike Leone further solidified the importance of prioritizing week 17 in his manifesto. His research revealed that your ability to win a 470-person final can increase by nearly 50% by game stacking, a truly staggering number. We aren't going to get into the weeds on structures for this video, but it's worth mentioning that if you take 3 quarterbacks, stacking all of them is ideal and results in the most playoff EV. Once you've been week 17 pilled, it's natural to want to circle some specific games to stack. In prioritizing dome games that are immune from bad weather in late December and early January is a smart angle to consider. It's something that the BBM4 champ Fareed Shaheed prioritized on his $3 million roster.
That was my most stacked game was Minnesota Green Bay and Dallas and Detroit were the main 2 games I tried to stack the most. So I was getting every piece I could from those 2 teams.
Matchup or the fact they were in domes, or what was the idea?
Fact they were in domes. I kind of am a dome bro, like a indoor game. Like at this part of the year, it always gets me, dude. Like the weather. Aren't you worried about the weather, bro?
But it's important to remember that we are betting on correlation, not weather. Last year's Browns-Jets Week 17 game was the perfect example. Thursday game on a short week, outdoors, El Nino year. Everyone was very concerned.
Dude, aren't you worried about a tornado in Cleveland on December 28th?
And then the game went nuclear. Breece Hall, Jerome Ford, and David Njoku all delivered week-winning performances. And the moral is, when a game goes off, the rising tide lifts a bunch of boats, regardless of predicted weather patterns. One of the most important angles we need to consider when drafting in May is both painfully obvious and yet often tricky to execute. We need to draft players who will be contributing points in the fantasy playoffs, and thus we need to avoid unnecessary risks when drafting earlier. The earlier we draft, the more likely we are to draft an injured player or someone who doesn't have a role by the time the season starts. Simply having a full roster of contributing players is one of the biggest ways to boost your playoff expected value. There were many great strategic angles to Pat Kerrane's winning BBM3 team, which I broke down in the video Anatomy of a Winning Lineup, but the most simple one is that 15 of his 18 players were live throughout the playoffs. A good example for avoiding dead roster spots early is not guessing on backup running backs. Last year, many people were taking rookie Zach Evans over Kyron Williams as the running back 2 in Los Angeles. That was a costly mistake for 2 reasons. 1, Evans wasn't the RB2 and resulted in a dead roster spot, and I don't need to explain the other reason. As the summer progresses and we get more info, we can take more liberties and scroll the F down more, which we'll discuss when we get to the August section, and also start hammering these RB2s that come into focus. But in May, we need to avoid landmines and simply draft players who will be playing. One other crucial thing that happens at the end of May is we get our first dose of rookie buzz, and we absolutely need to pay attention, especially for the rookies with lesser draft capital who need to make noise at camp to earn a role. This example from 2023 pains me to even rehash, but I wrote about Tank Dell and Puka Nacua in the same Fantasy Life newsletter on May 25th. I identified them as 2 deep rookie sleepers making noise, and I still did not act on this new information and ramp up my exposure. What the fuck, Pete? For whatever reason, despite being plugged into the news and literally writing about these guys, I was still too anchored to ADP and other targets to start mixing them in. This new info should have given me confidence they wouldn't be zeros. Nevertheless, let's head to June, where there aren't a ton of events going on that impact our best ball drafting, but that doesn't mean you can't draft. Last year, I drafted year-round out of necessity to max the contest while also streaming them all. If you don't have boatloads of time to devote to drafting in May and August, it's perfectly okay to draft continuously throughout the summer. In fact, it's my preference. All it takes is one perfect draft, as Liam Murphy discovered with his winning Best Ball Mania 2 team that was drafted on June 12th. And during the month of June, there are three main things I'm looking to do. First, I want to determine my risk tolerance for my Best Ball Mania portfolio. This mainly boils down to how aggressively I want to be going over or underweight on players, or if I'm okay letting each draft come to me and not forcing any specific targets or fades. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to taking heavy stances on a player. It's all a matter of preference. Last year, Best Ball Sharp Easy from the Deposit Kingdom Discord, link in the description if you want to join us, took massive stands on Derrick Henry, Taysom Hill, and Mike Evans. Easy has a healthy appetite for risk tolerance and was able to capitalize in a big way by advancing an absurd 55 of his 150 teams to the playoffs and finishing 11 teams in the regular season top 10,000, resulting in a very profitable year. On the flip side, disappointing playoff performances from Henry, Taysom, and Evans wiped out the majority of his teams in the playoffs. It's the perfect example of what I mean by risk tolerance. High risk can result in huge wins as well as huge wipeouts. Know what you're signing up for when you windmill it in on a player. If you think the market is flat out mispricing a player like Easy did with that trio, you can attack that. I'm personally more willing to go heavy with later picks than earlier picks because, as we discussed in the Scroll the F Down video, ADP ceases to matter around round 14, so that's a great place to make player stands. In the first round especially, I want to have exposure at an equal clip to all of the top players, knowing most of those guys are all capable of being the best player in fantasy. Along these same lines, June is the perfect time to build up portfolio positions. These can be player specific, but they could also be structural, like grabbing your elite quarterback builds if you think the price of the top QBs are going to rise when more people start drafting in August. One position I built up in June last year was capitalizing on the ambiguity of a few backfields. Last year, I thought all of the Dolphins running backs, Mostert, Achane, and Jeff Wilson, were all mispriced relative to the upside the top two would have once the depth chart settled. So I essentially had a one Dolphin running back in every draft rule, despite not knowing exactly which ones it would be. That obviously worked out extremely well. And in 2024, this could be attacking the elite tight ends, who are cheaper than they've ever been as a cohort. I personally plan to scoop them up in rounds 5 and 6 until the market corrects. One note on this, once you've built up your position and have heavy exposure to a player or a strategy, it's okay to keep drafting them, but you want to be even more price conscious. Try to push that player past ADP so you can start to build more super teams. You're not going to stop drafting them altogether, rather you are strategically trying to squeeze all of the juice out of the lemon. A final thing I like to do in June is randomize my late round selections. If you do have a lower risk tolerance or a lack of strong player takes, I love the idea of randomizing late round selections. It's something many sharp players do, and it's particularly helpful when a bunch of players are in the same tier. This can help us avoid subconscious biases or drafting too rigidly off of ranks, both of which could result in having way too much of a single player that you don't actually value significantly more than others in the same tier. Last year, I drafted a shitload of Marvin Mims only to watch him play behind someone named Little Jordan Humphrey. But what I really should have been doing was trying to get exposure to a basket of rookie wide receivers because they've historically had the ability to significantly outperform their ADP compared to veterans. I got too confident that Mims was by far the best bet of those late round rookie wide receivers when I should have been randomizing Mims selections with other late round rookies like Puka Nacua, Jaden Reed, Josh Downs, and Tank Dell, who weren't that much different of a bet. Welcome to July, where best ball summer really heats up. The dead period is over and training camps provide us with even more information to digest and act on. This is the time of year last year we started to get tidbits that Kyren Williams was the clear RB2 in Los Angeles and that Cam Akers was falling out of favor with the team. It's natural to be skeptical of puff pieces from training camp, but we also need to realize that we have information that May and June drafters didn't have access to, and that's an angle we should look to exploit when possible. This information blitz from players returning to camp gives us opportunities to secure ADP values simply by anticipating how news will impact the drafting market. This news could be pup list movements, free agency rumors, or new injuries. Last year around this time, rumors were swirling that the Jets wanted to add another back, likely Dalvin Cook, because Breece Hall was going to be slow to start the season. And even though this was already baked into Hall's ADP, savvy drafters knew that the market would double count the future addition of a back and push Hall's price down even more. In this scenario, the play was not to draft Breece in July and wait to load up in August once they added a back and his price dropped, which is exactly what happened after the Jets signed Dalvin. A 2024 example of this could be Nick Chubb. Chubb is almost a lock to land on the pup as he still recovers from his brutal ACL injuries. And even though Chubb is already cheap, it's very likely he'll get even cheaper once that happens. Hold off on drafting Chubb and other early pup list candidates and wait for an even better price later. We'll make a video on these specific examples when we get to July, so make sure you guys are subscribed to the Deposit Kingdom channel, turn those notifications on, and you won't miss it when that drops. Finally, July is a great time to review your portfolio and outline a plan for August so you can either rebalance or get more aggressive based on your current portfolio and positions. I did this last year at the beginning of July and wrote about it in my free weekly newsletter, the P.O. Box, and I learned a lot about what I wanted to do in my remaining drafts. The exercise revealed that I had a ton of late round quarterback builds, but they were heavily focused on Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett, even though I liked Brock Purdy just as much. I then made sure to prioritize Purdy in drafts the rest of the way because the bet I wanted to make was on late round quarterback builds, not specifically Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett. All right, we made it to August, where the preseason and the final best ball drafting stretch bring us a ton of strategic opportunities to take advantage of. The main things we want to do here is leverage all of this new information that early drafters don't have access to and try to build unique teams with players and combos that earlier drafters couldn't take advantage of. August represents the heart of Scroll the F Down season. If you haven't watched our entire video on scrolling the F down, you should do so after watching this video. But this is our opportunity to select intriguing players who have emerged as fantasy sleepers that were not getting drafted in the earlier months. We should be breaking ties in favor of selecting these recently emerging players. August last year is when Puka Nacua really came into focus as a late round dart throw. And not only was Puka an objectively good pick in a vacuum because of his projected role in 3 wide receiver sets for the Rams offense, but he had not been getting drafted during the majority of the contest. Here's another really good example. On my final stream last year, Rich Rebar floated Zach Moss as a pick when we got positive news about him being ready for week 1. Do you have a favorite of Deion Jackson, Evan Hull, Zach Moss?
I think Zach Moss is probably the best of the guys. If you look at just the way they used him last year. I mean, I think he's the long-term best bet for sure.
Moss was drafted in only 13.7% of BBM drafts. Compare that to another backup running back like Deontay Foreman, who was selected in 95% of drafts. Early drafters had no clue about Moss being relevant, so we have to press that information advantage and select these emerging players aggressively in August. Moss is also the perfect example for why we can lean more heavily into zero RB builds in August than we could in May, when we don't have a solid grasp on the depth charts. In August, though, we can start taking the RB2s who have contingent value more aggressively. Along with Kyron and Moss, Ty Chandler and Keaton Mitchell were two more running backs who became clearer targets last year thanks to August information and helped unlock more zero RB builds. If you push zero RB too hard in May, you'll end up with a lot of dead roster spots. The last thing we need to be very careful of in August is bullshit buzz. And this is where the skill comes into play because not all August info is relevant. A rookie repeatedly getting first team reps and playing with the starters, that's actionable information. A player looking spry in shorts running drills is not. And yet, that's exactly what happened with Calvin Ridley last year when a couple practice clips boosted his ADP a full round. We've made it to September when the NFL season will kick off on September 5th, and the contest generally locks a few days before. Get those final drafts in and push all of those same edges from August. Best Ball Mania is a unique beast. Over the summer, there will be contests that pop up that only last for a week or two. But because of the size and scale of BBM, it will span the duration of the entire summer, and we need to pivot our strategies accordingly. As we've outlined in the monthly sections, there are pros and cons to drafting both early and late. To quickly summarize those, drafting early pros. Inefficient ADPs can lead to big ADP values and closing line value, and your odds of getting a super team increase a lot when drafting in May, June, and July. Drafting early cons. You increase your risk of dead roster spots and not as many live players. Drafting late pros. Huge information advantage on early drafters, and you can more easily avoid dead roster spots, attack zero RB, and the new scroll the F down targets who weren't drafted early. And then finally, the drafting late cons. It's almost impossible to get big ADP values, which makes it harder to build super teams. You can see in this chart from RotoViz's Michael Dubner that teams drafted early and late advance to the semis at a higher rate than those drafted in June and early July. And yet, 3 of the best BBM rosters over the past few years have been drafted during this exact dead period. This makes intuitive sense to me that the perfect draft could come during this dead window because it provides drafters with the best of both early and late worlds. That's more info and more live players, but still chances at getting strong ADP value before the preseason. If you did want to try to optimize your drafting, Dubner has previously suggested a budget along these lines to maximize the larger edges in drafting early and late. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to weigh in on the great slow draft versus fast draft debates, because you might be wondering how to draft your BBM teams. Regardless of what you do, don't stream them all. I do not recommend that. But as far as slow versus fast, both Dubner's research and Leone's have revealed there isn't a huge difference between the two. So put down the pitchforks and draft whenever is the most convenient for you. You're now ready to attack BBM and stay one step ahead of your opponents. Feel free to bookmark this video and come back to it throughout the summer, and check out this playlist for more evergreen best ball strategy videos. And remember, if all else fails, just remember to live a little.